Hello, and welcome back to the world of Wysteria. This afternoon, I'll be reading chapter 26. And just for your information, this begins on page 199 in the book. I have about 350 pages, so we are making good progress. Wysteria, chapter 26. Once they were alone, Emily turned to Will. "So, now what do you think?" she asked him. "Do you believe her?" she said. Will thought for a second. "Do you?" he asked. "Well, I don't think she was untruthful," she answered, choosing her words carefully. "But I get the feeling she's holding something back." "With regard to Lily?" "Yes," she said. "There's some kind of girl thing going on between them." Will chuckled. "Girl thing, huh?" "Yes," said Emily. "Some kind of rivalry, like they're jealous of each other." "So you think they have met before?" he asked. "Before the festival," she said. "Maybe, although I don't see how. It might just be an instinctive hormonal reaction, two alpha types on each other's territory." "But they inhabit completely different worlds," said Will. "One of them is a dreamer, and the other is, well, I'm not sure what to call her. They're both women, Will." "Yes, both beautiful women." And despite their essential differences, Will sensed something similar when he looked into their eyes, and felt the same familiar comfort when he held them close. He could explain what he had felt from Lily, for if she were a creature born from within him, a product, a reflection of his deepest thoughts and emotions, then they had a natural and profound connection. But what about Charlotte? Clearly, her flirtatious manner was part of her personality, but there was a seductive element that seemed to go beyond that. "Whatever it is," said Emily, "I don't think either one of them is dangerous. I believe they're both on our side." Will nodded. "Mysterious, perhaps, but faithful allies." "I agree," he said. "But if there are things they aren't telling us, secrets they don't trust us with, then how far should we extend our trust?" "I see what you're saying," she replied. "Neither mistrust nor fully trust. Until we know the whole truth, I think that's the best approach," he said. At least we now know who our attackers were, one of them at least, and why they were after us," Emily pointed out, trying to close their discussion on a positive note. "True," he said. However, though good to know, it gave Will little comfort, for it meant that others might follow, motivated by the price on her head. "Now, shall we get back to our body control exercises?" he asked. "I think it was your turn to choose the game." "Sure," said Emily. But after thinking for a moment, she had a change of mind. "Actually, why don't we try traveling today? Within Wysteria, of course." "That's fine," said Will. "But since I don't know where to begin, you'll have to take the lead and come up with a plan." "All right," she said. "Let me see." She paused and pondered, then proposed a course of action. "Let's start by just trying to skip somewhere. We'll see what happens, and then go from there." Emily suggested they choose the square as their target destination. Here, she said, offering Will her hand. Hold on to me and try to let go of everything else. He took her hand and closed his eyes, putting his full attention on the feel of her fingers entwined with his. He pressed his palm against hers and tried to imagine their two spirits joined by a bond that was stronger than their physical grip. Are you ready? She asked. Yes, he answered. Breaking free will be the difficult part, she told him. But if we manage to make it into the dark, start focusing on the fountain. She took a deep breath. Okay, I'm going to step through the door now. There was a moment of stillness. Will then felt a tug, though not from Emily's hand, but from some force deep within him. His mind was being pulled from his body, and he tried to let go. But some part of him resisted the separation. He then felt an uncomfortable pressure in the pit of his stomach, and a tingling sensation in his joints. The discomfort turned to pain, growing more intense as it radiated out into his extremities. Just when it seemed he would be torn apart, the pressure in his torso lessened, and the pain in his arms and legs began to subside. Will opened his eyes and saw that they hadn't moved from the garden. What happened? He said, dazed and disoriented, as if he'd just been roused from a deep sleep. I'm not sure, said Emily. I started to enter the dark, but I couldn't get all the way in. It was like I was attached to a big rubber band. The more I stretched it, the more it resisted. It felt that way to me too, he said, except that I was the rubber band, and I was about to snap. Was it painful for you? Will asked her. Not painful, she said, just frustrating, like being stuck in the mud, spinning my wheels. Good, he said, with a sigh of relief. Why? Was it for you? She asked. Physically painful. I felt like a tree being uprooted from the ground, he replied. It was very unpleasant. I'm so sorry, said Emily. I should have stopped sooner. Are you okay now? Yes, I'm fine, he said. It seemed to be working at first. I felt the pull, and I tried to follow, but then he paused to think how best to describe it. It was as if I were being pulled through an opening that was much too small for my body. That sounds awful, she said sympathetically. So, what should we do now? I think we should try again, he answered. Are you sure? She asked. You didn't give up after your first attempt to reach the branch yesterday, he reminded her. I just don't want to end up standing next to the fountain, holding hands with a bloody arm, she remarked. Will laughed at the image. He knew she was joking, but then he began to wonder. Emily seemed to read his thoughts. No, Will, that couldn't happen, she said, with confidence. She hesitated for a moment, then amended her statement. I don't think that could happen. Let's hope not, he said. So, should I do anything differently? She asked. Can you pull harder? No, she answered. I don't think so. Then just keep going, he told her. Okay, she said reluctantly. But give me a signal if you want me to stop. If it gets too painful, let go of my hand. After taking a moment to recover, they joined hands and tried again. This time, Will was prepared for the pain, but when it came, as it did before, it was no less excruciating. Though he held on to Emily for as long as he could, hoping she might pull him free, he finally had to release his grip and end the tug-of-war. Emily released his hand and opened her eyes. "Same feeling?" she asked. "Yes," said Will, as the pain retreated from his body. "I can feel my mind, my inner self, trying to leave, but my body feels rooted here. It won't let me go." "I don't know what to say that might help," she lamented. "It's such an automatic thing for me. I don't think about how I'm doing it. It just happens." "Do you feel like you're leaving your body?" he asked, trying to find some clue that might lead him out of his world. "Not really," she said. "I don't leave it, because there's nothing to leave. It simply ceases to exist when I step into the dark." What she said made perfect sense. When he left Wysteria each night to return home, he felt no part of him resisting his departure. He merely surrendered to the call of sleep. Will felt stymied, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. "One more time," he said resolutely. Emily smiled. "It's your call, dear. Just let me know when you're ready," she said, taking his hand again. Will took a few seconds to prepare, imagining himself without a body, a mind without spatial extension, without a location, without boundaries. Then he whispered, "Go ahead." Again, he felt the dull thump in his gut as Emily began to pull. He did his best to shed the physical shell that bound him to his world, and for a moment it seemed he might succeed, for he caught a glimpse of the blackness, as if he were peeking through a doorway. And yet he could not enter. His body would not relinquish its hold, would not leave his mind free to follow Emily into the dark. And then came the pain. To carry on with the struggle seemed pointless. Will could have held out longer, but seeing that he was going nowhere, he let go his grip on Emily's hand. For a second or two, she continued to pull. Then he felt her fingers begin to lose their hold, and suddenly the connection between them was broken. Will opened his eyes and found himself alone among the trees. Emily was gone. Where was she? Had she been pulled back to her bed? No, she was still here in Wysteria. Somewhere. "She's in the square," he realized. But then she was gone. Before his confusion could turn to alarm, however, Emily returned, crystallizing from a cloud of mist. "Welcome back," he said, relieved and smiling. "Did you miss me?" she asked. "Of course," he answered. "So you left without me, huh?" "I slipped," she explained. "I was trying to pull as hard as I could, and when you let go, I lost my grip. Before I could put on the brakes, my momentum carried me to the fountain." I still couldn't leave, Will told her. But it was different this time. I saw the dark, felt it begin to surround me. My body just refused to let go. Pain again? Yes. Well, don't be discouraged, Emily said to him. Remember, it took Jeremy a while to learn how to tunnel through his world. I had hoped we might be able to pull it off today, but only because you're you and full of surprises. Will, too, had been hopeful and couldn't help feeling some disappointment. He wasn't discouraged, however. I'll figure it out, he said, pulling Emily close and kissing the side of her head. I know you will, she replied. Okay, and thank you for joining me this afternoon, and we will return shortly with chapter 27.